Every parent knows the weight of failing your child when life falls apart around you. Jonas Hale felt that weight crushing his chest as he packed everything that mattered into an old pickup truck after losing his wife and their home. With his 12-year-old son Ollie beside him, he drove deep into Montana's mountains, looking for somewhere to start over. They found an old stone cabin hidden in the woods. Jonas thought it would be their shelter. Ollie found something else when he moved a loose stone by the fireplace. Underneath was a chamber filled with treasures worth $50 million. The money could solve all their problems, but some discoveries come with a price. What happens when strangers start showing up, asking questions? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Jonas Hale had never imagined his life would come down to what could fit in the bed of a 2008 Ford F-150. He stood in the driveway of what used to be his home, watching the estate sale vultures pick through the remnants of 20 years of marriage. Sarah's grandmother's china went to a woman who haggled the price down to $15. The dining room table where they'd celebrated every birthday, every holiday, every small victory, sold for $85 to a young couple who loaded it carelessly into their SUV. The wedding ring on his finger caught the morning light. A simple gold band that Sarah had slipped onto his hand in a small church ceremony back when they both believed love could conquer anything. She'd been wrong about that, but Jonas couldn't bring himself to remove it. Even now, 8 months after the funeral, it felt like the only thing anchoring him to the man he used to be. "Dad, they're taking Mom's garden tools." 12-year-old Ollie stood beside him, his sandy hair falling into eyes that held too much understanding for his age. The boy had grown quiet after Sarah's death, retreating into books and solitary walks, but he still noticed everything. Jonas watched a stranger load Sarah's carefully maintained gardening tools into a truck and felt something break inside his chest all over again. "She won't need them anymore, son." The words tasted like ash. Sarah had spent countless hours in that garden, teaching Ollie the names of plants, showing him how to coax life from soil. Now, strangers would use her tools to tend gardens she'd never see. The medical bills had been relentless. Even with insurance, the experimental treatments, the extended hospital stays, the medications that promised hope but delivered only false comfort, it all added up to a debt that swallowed their savings, their home, their future. Jonas had fought to keep the house for Ollie's sake, believing that familiar walls and his mother's presence in every room might somehow cushion the blow of losing her. Instead, it had only prolonged the inevitable. "Where are we going to live?" Ollie's voice was steady, but Jonas caught the tremor underneath. This boy had already lost his mother. Now Jonas was taking away his childhood home, his school, his friends, everything stable in his small world. Jonas knelt to meet his son's eyes. At 12, Ollie was beginning to show signs of the height he'd inherited from both parents, but his face still held the softness of childhood. Sarah's eyes looked back at Jonas, the same grey-green that could shift from storm to calm in an instant. "Remember when your mom used to talk about the cabin her grandfather built up in Montana? The stories about him going off into the wilderness for months at a time?" Ollie nodded slowly. Sarah had filled their evenings with tales of her grandfather's adventures in the northern peaks, how he'd built a small cabin with his own hands and lived off the land for weeks at a time. Jonas had always assumed the stories were embellished, family legends that grew with each telling. "I found the deed in your mum's papers. The cabin's still there, still in the family. I thought maybe we could go see it, spend some time in the mountains. Just you and me." It wasn't the whole truth. Jonas had no idea if the cabin was habitable or if it even still existed after all these years. But he'd found the deed, yellowed and brittle, tucked away in Sarah's jewelry box along with old photographs and her grandmother's pearls. The property was 43 acres in the northern peaks of Montana, deeded to the family in 1923. It was the only thing they owned that the creditors couldn't touch. and Jonas was desperate enough to gamble their future on a 70-year-old. "Memory, what about school?" Ollie asked. "We'll figure it out. Maybe homeschooling for a while. Your mom always said you were too smart for regular classes anyway." Jonas forced a smile. "Think of it as an adventure." Ollie considered this with the seriousness that had marked all his decisions since his mother's death. He'd grown up fast in the past year, watching his parents navigate the maze of medical appointments and insurance battles. He'd seen his father cry when he thought no one was looking. He'd heard the whispered conversations about money and bills and impossible choices. Will we come back? Jonas didn't have an answer for that. The truth was, there was nothing left to come back to. His job at the electronics store had offered sympathy, but not much flexibility when Sarah needed round-the-clock care. The missed days had piled up, leading to reduced hours, reduced pay, and eventually a gentle suggestion that perhaps Jonas needed time to focus on family matters. By the time Sarah died, he was 3 months behind on mortgage payments and drowning in medical debt. "I don't know, son, but sometimes you have to go somewhere else to figure out where you belong." They finished loading the truck in silence. Everything essential fit into the bed: clothes, basic tools, camping gear Jonas had bought years ago for weekend trips that never happened, Ollie's books and his mother's recipe box, the few photographs that mattered. The rest, furniture, appliances, the accumulation of a life lived with optimism, would be sold to strangers or hauled away by the estate sale company. Jonas walked through the empty house one last time. In the kitchen, he could still see Sarah, dancing while she cooked, spinning around to kiss him when he came home from work. In the living room, he remembered Christmas mornings with Ollie tearing through presents while Sarah laughed and took pictures. In their bedroom, he could almost hear her voice calling him to bed, complaining that he worked too late, promising they'd have more time together tomorrow. Tomorrow. Sarah had always talked about tomorrow as if it were guaranteed. He found Ollie in the backyard, standing by his mother's rose bushes. The new owners had specifically asked that the garden be left intact, drawn to the beauty Sarah had cultivated over 2 decades. At least her flowers would outlive the memories. "She loved these," Ollie said softly. "She loved you more." Jonas put his hand on his son's shoulder. "Everything she did, everything she planted, it was all for you. You carry that with you no matter where we go." They drove north through 3 states, sleeping in truck stops and cheap motels, living off fast food and the sandwiches Jonas made with supplies from gas station convenience stores. Ollie read in the passenger seat, occasionally looking up to comment on the changing landscape. The flat farmland of their childhood home gradually gave way to rolling hills, then foothills, and finally the imposing peaks of the northern Rockies. Jonas had studied the property maps online, tracing the route to what appeared to be the middle of nowhere. The cabin sat on a ridge, accessible only by a logging road that hadn't been maintained in decades. As they climbed higher into the mountains, civilization fell away behind them. Cell phone towers disappeared. Road signs became sparse, then non-existent. The air grew thin and crisp, carrying the scent of pine and snow even in late spring. "It's beautiful," Ollie said, pressing his face to the window as they wound through stands of towering evergreens. Jonas had to agree. After months of hospital corridors and lawyers' offices, after the suffocating weight of failure and loss, the vastness of the wilderness felt like permission to breathe again. Here, his problems seemed smaller, more manageable. Here, maybe he could figure out how to be the father Ollie deserved. The logging road was rougher than expected. The truck bounced and lurched over ruts and fallen branches, climbing steadily through forest that looked untouched by human presence. After 2 hours of careful navigation, Jonas began to worry they'd missed a turn. Then, through a gap in the trees, he saw it. The stone cabin sat on a small clearing overlooking a valley that stretched to distant peaks. Built from native fieldstone and weathered timber, it looked like it had grown from the mountain itself. Moss covered portions of the walls, and wildflowers had claimed the areas around the foundation, but the structure appeared sound. A stone. Chimney rose from one end, and small windows looked out over the valley like watchful eyes. "Mom's grandfather built this?" Ollie asked, his voice filled with wonder. Jonas parked the truck and stepped out, breathing air so clean it made his lungs. "Ach." The silence was profound, broken only by the whisper of wind through pine branches and the distant call of a hawk. No traffic, no sirens, no sounds of human complication. Just peace. They approached the cabin together. The wooden door was weathered, but solid, secured with an old iron latch. Jonas lifted it carefully, half expecting the door to crumble at his touch. Instead, it swung open smoothly, revealing the interior of their new home. The cabin was larger than it appeared from outside, a single room with a stone fireplace at one end and a small loft accessible by a wooden ladder. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light that streamed through windows, surprisingly clean for their age. The previous occupant, Sarah's grandfather presumably, had left the cabin well organized. Shelves lined the walls, holding books, tools, and household items covered by decades of dust. A rough-hewn table sat near the windows, and a simple bed frame occupied one corner. "It's like a time capsule," Ollie said, running his finger along the table and leaving a trail in the dust. Jonas tested the floorboards, checked the roofline for obvious damage, examined the stonework around the fireplace. The cabin had been built to last, constructed by someone who understood the mountain weather and planned accordingly. With some cleaning and basic maintenance, it would be habitable. That night, they made camp outside, cooking canned soup over a small propane stove, while the sun set behind the western peaks. The stars emerged one by one, then all at once, filling the sky with a brilliance Jonas had forgotten existed. In the city, light pollution had reduced the night sky to a handful of visible stars. Here, the Milky Way stretched overhead like a river of light. "Did you know that Mom used to wish on stars when she was little?" Jonas said, settling back against his sleeping bag. Ollie looked up from his book. He'd been reading by flashlight, determined to finish the chapter before bed. What did she wish for? Adventure, mostly. She always said she wanted to see the world, have great stories to tell her grandchildren someday. Jonas's voice caught slightly. Sarah would never have grandchildren, would never know what kind of man Ollie would become. "Maybe this is her adventure," Ollie said quietly. "Maybe she wanted us to come here." Jonas looked at his son, surprised by the wisdom in those words. Maybe this wasn't just running away from their problems. Maybe this was running towards something better. He reached into his pocket and pulled out Sarah's wedding ring, which he'd finally removed that morning. The gold caught the starlight, holding memories of 20 years of shared dreams. Slowly, he placed it on the ground beside a wildflower that grew near their camping spot. "For your mom," he said simply. Ollie nodded and placed his small hand over his father's. Together they sat in the mountain silence, surrounded by the vastness of possibility and the quiet promise of a new beginning. 3 weeks into their mountain life, Jonas had established a routine that felt almost normal. Rise with the sun, check the solar panels he'd installed to power Ollie's tablet and a few essential devices, tend to the small vegetable garden he'd started behind the cabin, and spend the afternoon teaching his son practical skills, their suburban. Life had never required. Ollie was learning to split firewood, identify edible plants, and read weather patterns in the movement of clouds across the peaks. The boy had adapted to their new life with remarkable resilience, while Jonas worried about social isolation and educational gaps. Ollie seemed to thrive in the mountain environment. He'd discovered a natural curiosity about everything around them, the geology of the stone formations, the behavior of the wildlife, the intricate ecosystems that flourished in the alpine environment. His questions were constant and thoughtful, pushing Jonas to learn alongside him. It was Ollie's methodical nature that led to the discovery. While Jonas focused on the practical necessities of mountain living, Ollie had begun a systematic exploration of the cabin itself. He'd cleaned and organized the shelves, catalogued the books left by previous occupants, and examined every corner of their new home with the thoroughness of an archaeologist. The previous owner, Sarah's grandfather, had been a meticulous man, based on the careful organization and detailed notes he'd left throughout the cabin. "Dad, this stone is different from the others." Jonas looked up from the firewood he was stacking. Ollie knelt beside the massive stone fireplace that dominated one wall of the cabin, running his fingers along the hearthstones with focused concentration. "Different how? The mortar around this one is newer. See?" Ollie traced the edges of a stone about the size of a dinner plate, positioned at the base of the hearth, where it would normally be covered by ash and debris. "All the other stones have this old, weathered mortar that's almost the same color as the stone, but this one has whiter mortar, and it's not as worn." Jonas set down the firewood and joined his son beside the fireplace. Ollie was right. The stone in question had definitely been removed and reset at some point, though the work had been done carefully enough that it wasn't immediately obvious. "Maybe your great-great-grandfather had to repair some damage," Jonas suggested, though even as he said it, he felt a flutter of curiosity. Sarah's grandfather had been many things, but careless wasn't one of them. Every other aspect of the cabin showed the precision of a man who planned for permanence. "Can we move it?" Ollie asked. Jonas examined the stone more carefully. It was large and heavy, but not immovable. The mortar was indeed newer, and now that he looked closely, he could see tiny gaps around the edges where the seal wasn't perfect. "I suppose we could try, but why would we want to?" Ollie's eyes held the same intensity Jonas remembered from Sarah when she was working through a complex problem. "Because someone went to the trouble of making it removable. People don't do extra. It worked for no reason." The logic was sound, and Jonas found himself caught up in his son's curiosity. They spent the next hour carefully chipping away the newer mortar with tools from the cabin's well-stocked workshop. The work was painstaking, requiring patience to avoid damaging either the stone or the surrounding hearth. When the mortar finally gave way, the stone slid out more easily than Jonas had expected. Behind it was a dark cavity, clearly intentional. It carved into the larger foundation stones of the fireplace. "There's something in there," Ollie whispered. Jonas reached into the cavity and felt cold metal. He pulled out an object wrapped in oiled cloth, followed by another, then another. Soon they had a small collection of mysterious packages arranged on the cabin floor. The first package contained an ornate brass mechanism, intricate and beautiful, unlike anything Jonas had ever seen. Gears and dials covered its surface, and a crystal lens was mounted at one end. It looked like a combination of compass, telescope, and clockwork, crafted with the precision of a master jeweler. The second package held a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with detailed drawings of plants, careful handwritten notes, and what appeared to be maps of the surrounding mountain region. The handwriting was precise and elegant, the work of someone accustomed to academic documentation. The third and largest package made Jonas's breath catch. Inside the oiled cloth were gold coins, dozens of them, heavy and genuine. But these weren't modern coins. These were historical pieces, some bearing dates from the 1800s, others clearly foreign in origin. Even to Jonas's untrained eye, they represented significant value. "Dad!" Ollie's voice was barely audible. "Look at this!" The boy had opened the journal and was staring at the first page. In the same elegant handwriting that filled the rest of the book, someone had written, "The private research of Dr. Elias Thornfield, Fellow of the Royal Botanical Society, 1847 to 1889, for the advancement of human knowledge and the preservation of nature's most precious secrets." Jonas sat back on his heels, mind racing. Dr. Elias Thornfield. The name meant nothing to him, but the implications were staggering. This wasn't just a hidden cache of family mementos. This was a treasure trove that had been deliberately concealed, improbably for decades. "There's more writing," Ollie said, carefully turning pages. The journal was thick, filled with detailed botanical illustrations, pressed plant specimens, and extensive notes. "Look at these drawings. They're beautiful." Jonas leaned over his son's shoulder to examine the journal. The plant illustrations were indeed beautiful, rendered with scientific precision, but also artistic flair. Each drawing was accompanied by detailed notes about the plant's properties, habitat, and potential uses. Some of the notes were in English, others in what appeared to be Latin, and still others in a code or shorthand that Jonas couldn't decipher. "Who do you think Dr. Thornfield was?" Ollie asked. "I don't know, but someone thought his work was valuable enough to hide." Jonas picked up one of the gold coins, feeling its substantial weight. These coins alone are probably worth thousands of dollars. But why hide it here? In Mom's family's cabin? It was a good question, and Jonas didn't have an answer. The timing didn't make sense either. Based on the dates in the journal, Dr. Thornfield had been active in the mid to late 1800s, but Sarah's great-great-grandfather hadn't built the cabin until the 1920s, according to family stories. How had Thornfield's research ended up hidden in a fireplace that was built decades after his death? Maybe great-great-grandfather found it somewhere else and hid it here for safekeeping, Ollie suggested. Maybe. Jonas was beginning to feel overwhelmed by the implications. "Son, we need to be very careful about this. If these things are as valuable as they appear, there might be people who would want to take them from us." "Oh, but they're ours, right? We found them in our cabin." The legal implications were complicated, and Jonas wasn't sure of the answer. Treasure trove laws varied by state, and the fact that they'd found the cash on their own property didn't necessarily mean they had clear title to it. If Dr. Thornfield had living descendants, if the items had been stolen originally, if they represented significant historical or scientific value, any number of factors could complicate their claim. "Let's keep this between us for now," Jonas said, "until we understand more about what we've found and what it means." Ollie nodded solemnly. The boy had learned to keep family secrets during his mother's illness, when financial troubles and medical concerns were discussed in hushed tones after he was supposedly asleep. They spent the rest of the evening examining their discovery. The brass mechanism was particularly intriguing. It appeared to be some kind of navigational instrument. But, unlike any compass Jonas had ever seen, the crystal lens could be adjusted. The dials could be set to various positions, and the whole device seemed designed for a specific purpose that wasn't immediately apparent. The journal was even more fascinating. Dr. Thornfield had been methodical in his documentation, recording not just the plants he'd discovered, but their exact locations, the conditions where they thrived, and detailed notes about their medicinal or other useful properties. Some of the plants he documented were familiar, common wildflowers, and herbs found throughout the Rocky Mountains. But others were entirely unknown to Jonas, illustrated with such detail that they seemed almost magical. As the night grew late and they prepared for bed, Jonas found himself staring at the gold. Coins spread across the cabin table. Each one represented choices: security, education for Ollie, the possibility of rebuilding their lives with dignity rather than desperation. But they also represented questions, complications, and potentially dangerous attention from people who might not respect their claim to the discovery. "Dad?" Ollie's voice came from the loft where he'd made his bedroom. "Yeah, son? Do you think Mom knew about the treasure in the fireplace?" Jonas considered the question. Sarah had loved her family's mountain stories, but she'd never mentioned anything about hidden treasure or mysterious researchers. Her tales had focused on her grandfather's self-reliance and love of solitude, not on scientific expeditions or concealed valuables. "I don't think so," Jonas said finally. "But maybe she brought us here anyway. Maybe this is her way of taking care of us." The thought brought him comfort as he wrapped the artifacts carefully and returned them to their hiding place. Tomorrow would bring decisions about what to do with their discovery, but tonight he allowed himself to feel something he hadn't experienced in months: hope. Outside the cabin windows, the mountain stars wheeled overhead in their eternal patterns, keeping watch over secrets that had waited decades to be revealed. The morning after their discovery, Jonas woke with the unsettling feeling that their lives had fundamentally changed overnight. The artifacts were safely hidden back behind the hearthstone, but their presence seemed to fill the cabin with new possibilities and new dangers. Ollie was already awake, sitting at the cabin table with his tablet, trying to connect to the weak internet signal they could sometimes catch from a distant cell tower. "Any luck?" Jonas asked, starting coffee on their small propane stove. "I got connected for a few minutes. I searched for Dr. Elias Thornfield." Ollie's excitement was barely contained. "Dad, he was real. He was famous." Jonas set down his coffee mug and joined his son at the table. The tablet screen showed a Wikipedia page with a formal portrait of a distinguished gentleman in Victorian-era clothing. Dr. Elias Thornfield, 1820–1889, had been a renowned botanist, explorer, and researcher who had made significant contributions to the understanding of medicinal plants in the American West. It says he disappeared during his final expedition in 1889. Ollie continued, scrolling through the article. He was exploring the northern Rocky Mountains, looking for rare plant specimens. His expedition team returned without him, claiming he'd gone off alone and never came back. Jonas read over his son's shoulder. According to the brief biography, Thornfield had been a wealthy man, funding his own expeditions and research. He'd published several scientific papers on botanical discoveries, but his most significant work, rumored to include revolutionary findings about medicinal plants, was never recovered after his disappearance. "So the journal we found could be that missing research," Jonas said. "That's what I think, and look at this." Ollie switched to another browser tab. Dr. Thornfield was known for his secretive methods. Other scientists complained that he was too protective of his discoveries, that he wouldn't share his findings until he was ready to publish comprehensive results. The internet connection flickered and died, leaving them with more questions than answers. But the brief research had confirmed their suspicions. They had stumbled upon something of genuine historical and potentially scientific significance. Jonas retrieved the artifacts from their hiding place, and they spent the morning examining them more carefully in daylight. The brass instrument was even more intriguing than it had appeared by lamplight. Engraved along its edge were tiny markings that looked like coordinates or mathematical notations. "I think it's some kind of specialized compass," Ollie said, holding the device up to catch the morning light streaming through the windows. "But see these extra dials. Regular compasses don't have those." Jonas turned the dials experimentally. As he adjusted them, the crystal lens seemed to focus differently, and the compass needle began pointing in directions that had nothing to do with magnetic north. "Maybe it's designed to find specific things," Ollie suggested, "like how a metal detector is built to locate metal." The journal provided more clues. Dr. Thornfield had documented not just plant species, but also their precise locations, often with coordinates that seemed to correspond to the markings on the brass instrument. More intriguingly, many of his notes referenced other collection sites and preservation locations throughout the mountain region. "Dad, I think Dr. Thornfield hid things in multiple places," Ollie said, studying a particularly detailed map in the journal. "Look at these symbols he drew. They're scattered all over this mountain range." Jonas examined the map. Thornfield had marked dozens of locations with various symbols. Some looked like the compass device. Others resembled plant drawings, and still others were geometric shapes that could have meant anything. But why would he hide his research? If he was a legitimate scientist, wouldn't he want to share his discoveries? "Maybe he found something too valuable to trust to other people," Ollie said. "Or maybe he was worried about the wrong people getting hold of it." It was a sobering thought. Jonas had been thinking about their discovery in terms of its potential value to their family, but he hadn't considered the broader implications. If Dr. Thornfield had hidden his research for good reasons, what did that mean for Jonas and Ollie now that they'd found it? The sound of an approaching vehicle interrupted his thoughts. Jonas quickly gathered the artifacts and returned them to their hiding place, while Ollie peered out the cabin window. "It's a jeep," the boy reported. "Someone's coming up the logging." A road. Jonas felt his protective instincts sharpen. In 3 weeks of mountain living, they'd had no visitors. The cabin was remote enough that casual hikers were unlikely to stumble upon it, and there were no other inhabited structures within miles. The jeep pulled into their small clearing and stopped near Jonas's truck. A single occupant climbed out, a woman in hiking gear who appeared to be in her 50s, with graying brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She moved with the confident stride of someone comfortable in wilderness settings. "Hello there!" she called out, approaching the cabin with a friendly smile. "Sorry to bother you. I'm Dr. Margaret Chen from the University of Montana. I'm doing research on historical botanical surveys in this region." Jonas stepped outside to meet her, keeping Ollie close beside him. "Jonas Hale, this is my son Ollie." "What kind of research?" "I'm trying to trace the work of early botanical explorers who worked in the northern Rockies," Dr. Chen explained. "I heard there might be some old family records or artifacts in this area related to 19th century scientific expeditions." Jonas felt his pulse quicken. The timing seemed impossibly coincidental. "What makes you think that?" "Well, there are historical records suggesting that Dr. Elias Thornfield spent significant time in this mountain range during his final expedition. He was known for establishing research stations and collection sites, but most of his documentation was lost after his disappearance." Dr. Chen gestured toward the surrounding wilderness. "This area matches some of the geographical descriptions." In his surviving correspondence, Jonas exchanged a quick glance with Ollie. The boy's expression was carefully neutral, but Jonas could see the excitement and wariness in his eyes. "We haven't found anything like that," Jonas said carefully. "We just moved here recently." "Of course. I didn't expect you'd have any specific information." Dr. Chen pulled a business card from her pocket. "But if you do come across anything, old documents, scientific instruments, anything that might be related to historical research, I'd be very interested to hear about it. Dr. Thornfield's lost work represents a significant gap in our understanding of Rocky Mountain botany." She handed Jonas the card. "I'm particularly interested in his research on medicinal plants. There's evidence that he made some remarkable discoveries that were never published." "What kind of discoveries?" Ollie asked, unable to contain his curiosity. Dr. Chen smiled at the boy's interest. "Well, that's the mystery, isn't it? Based on his preliminary notes and correspondence with other scientists, he believed he'd identified several plant species with extraordinary therapeutic properties. But without his detailed research, we can't verify or build upon his work." "That must be frustrating for a scientist," Jonas said. "It is, but it's also exciting. Imagine if his research could still be recovered. The potential applications for modern medicine could be revolutionary." Dr. Chen looked around the clearing appreciatively. "This is beautiful country. I can see why someone would want to spend time here studying the natural world." She chatted for a few more minutes about the mountain ecosystem and her university research before climbing back into her jeep. As she drove away, Jonas noticed that she took her time navigating the logging road, almost as if she were studying the terrain. "What do you think?" Ollie asked once they were alone again. "I think it's a very interesting coincidence that a botanical researcher shows up the day after we discover Dr. Thornfield's journal. Do you think she knows something?" "Maybe. Or maybe she's just doing exactly what she said, trying to trace Thornfield's work through historical research." Jonas studied Dr. Chen's business card. It looked legitimate, complete with university logos and contact information. "But it makes me think we need to be very careful about who we trust with information about what we found." That afternoon, while Ollie worked on his lessons, Jonas took the compass device outside to experiment with it away from the cabin. The brass instrument continued to behave strangely, pointing in directions that seemed to correlate with some of the symbols in Thornfield's journal. As he adjusted the dials, Jonas noticed something that made his heart race. When set to certain positions, the compass pointed directly toward a distinctive rock formation visible from their clearing, a formation that appeared on one of Thornfield's maps, marked with the same symbol that was engraved on the compass itself. Jonas looked back at the cabin, where Ollie was visible through the window, bent over his books with the same focused concentration his mother had shown when tackling difficult problems. The boy deserved security, education, a future free from the financial desperation that had driven them to this remote mountain. But Jonas was beginning to understand that Dr. Thornfield's legacy was more complicated than simple treasure. If the botanist had hidden his research for protective reasons, if there were people actively searching for it, then their discovery might bring dangers as well as opportunities. The compass needle swung steadily toward the distant rock formation, as if calling Jonas to continue the exploration Dr. Thornfield had begun more than a century ago. Whatever secrets lay hidden in these mountains, Jonas was starting to realize that finding them was only the beginning of their story. 2 days after Dr. Chen's visit, Ollie made a discovery that changed everything they thought they understood about their situation. He'd been working methodically through Dr. Thornfield's journal, using his tablet to look up plant names and trying to decode the scientist's more cryptic notations. His natural curiosity and systematic approach reminded Jonas daily of Sarah, who had possessed the same patient intelligence when faced with complex problems. "Dad, you need to see this," Ollie called from the table where he'd spread out several pages of the journal alongside some items from the third package they'd found. Jonas set down the firewood he'd been splitting and joined his son. Ollie had arranged several of the gold coins in a row, along with what Jonas had initially thought was just another coin, but now realized was something different, a small, ornate locket. "I found this mixed in with the coins," Ollie said, holding up the locket. "At first, I thought it was just another piece of gold. But look, the locket was beautifully crafted, clearly old and valuable. But what made Jonas's breath catch was the engraving on its face. Etched into the gold was a family crest he recognized, the same design that appeared on some of his own family documents, papers he'd inherited from his father and grandfather. "That's our family crest," Jonas said quietly. "I know. And look what's inside." Ollie carefully opened the locket to reveal a tiny photograph of a woman in Victorian-era dress, along with an inscription in elegant script. "Margaret Hale, beloved, companion, 1885. Jonas stared at the inscription, his mind racing. Hale was his family name, and while Margaret was a common enough name in the 1800s, the combination with their family crest couldn't be coincidental. "There's more," Ollie said, opening the journal to a page he'd marked with a piece of paper. "Look at this entry." The journal page contained one of Dr. Thornfield's more personal entries, dated September 15th, 1889. "Margaret's concerns grow more pressing with each passing day. She understands the significance of my research better than any of my academic colleagues. But she also recognizes the dangers. The mining interests that seek to exploit these mountains care nothing for the delicate balance that sustains the medicinal plants I have catalogued. Margaret suggests that I should hide my most important discoveries until the proper time for their revelation arrives. Her family's mountain property would provide excellent security, and her understanding of botanical systems makes her the ideal custodian of my life's work." "Margaret Hale was working with Dr. Thornfield," Ollie said, his excitement barely contained. "She wasn't just his friend, she was his research partner." Jonas read the entry again, then flipped through several more pages Ollie had marked. The references to Margaret appeared throughout the later sections of the journal, describing a woman who clearly understood Thornfield's work and shared his concerns about protecting it from exploitation. But how does that connect to us? Jonas asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer. Margaret Hale was probably our great-great-great-grandmother, Ollie said. And if she helped Dr. Thornfield hide his research, then maybe our family has been the guardians all along, and we just didn't know it. The implications were staggering. Jonas had assumed they'd stumbled onto Dr. Thornfield's cache by pure chance, a stroke of luck that might provide financial security for their uncertain future. But if Ollie was right, their presence at the cabin wasn't accidental. They were here because their family had always been connected to Dr. Thornfield's work. Look at this page, Ollie continued, turning to another marked section. Dr. Thornfield writes about establishing multiple hiding places, but he says Margaret's family location is the primary repository where the most important materials would be secured. Jonas studied the page. The handwriting was clear and the meaning was unmistakable. Dr. Thornfield had trusted the Hale family with his most significant discoveries, creating a network of hidden sites but designating their mountain property as the central location. And here, Ollie said, pointing to a passage near the bottom of the page, he writes about creating guidance for future generations so that Margaret's descendants would understand their responsibility if the need ever arose. What kind of guidance? Jonas asked. Instead of answering directly, Ollie carefully lifted several pages of the journal, revealing that he'd discovered another hidden compartment. Built into the journal's leather binding was a thin space that contained folded papers, documents that had been concealed even within the concealed cache. I found these when I was being extra careful not to damage any of the pages, Ollie explained. They were sewn into the binding. The first document was a formal letter written in Dr. Thornfield's hand, but addressed to the future guardians of the Hale family. It was dated November 1889, just weeks before his recorded disappearance. Jonas read aloud, "To those who come after Margaret, I entrust not merely the preservation of my research, but the responsibility to ensure its proper application for the benefit of humanity. The medicinal plants I have catalogued represent revolutionary advances in healing, but they also represent enormous financial value to those who would exploit them without wisdom or restraint." The letter continued for several pages, detailing Dr. Thornfield's growing concerns about commercial interests that were already beginning to strip mine the mountain regions for valuable resources. He'd realized that his botanical discoveries, if made public without proper protection, would likely lead to the destruction of the very ecosystems that sustained the plants he'd found. So he created a guardian system, Ollie said, reading over his father's shoulder. Our family was supposed to protect his research until it could be revealed safely. But why didn't anyone tell us? Jonas asked. If this was such an important family responsibility, why didn't your mother know about it? The question hung between them, and Jonas realized that the answer might be simpler than it appeared. Family stories could be lost over generations, especially if they seemed like fantasy rather than fact. Sarah's tales about her grandfather's mountain adventures had sounded like folklore. The idea that those stories contained literal truth about hidden treasure and family obligations would have seemed absurd. Maybe the knowledge was passed down, but it got mixed up with regular family stories, Ollie suggested. Mom always said her grandfather was secretive about his time in the mountains. Maybe he was keeping the family secret, but nobody understood what it really meant. Jonas continued reading Dr. Thornfield's letter. The scientist had been remarkably thorough in his planning. He'd not only hidden his research materials, but had also created detailed instructions for his family guardians, including codes for interpreting his maps and guidance, for using the special compass to locate his other hiding places. There's something else, Ollie said, producing the final document from the journal's hidden compartment. This is a map, but it's different from the others. The map showed the entire northern Rockies region, marked with dozens of symbols and connected by lines that seemed to indicate travel routes or relationships between locations. But unlike the other maps in the journal, this one included detailed notations about modern landmarks, roads, towns, and geographical features that hadn't existed in Dr. Thornfield's time. Someone updated this map, Jonas realized. Someone who came after Dr. Thornfield. Margaret, Ollie said with certainty. She must have continued his work after he disappeared. Maybe she spent years visiting all his hiding places, maintaining them, making sure his research was preserved. Jonas studied the updated map more carefully. The notations were in a different handwriting than Dr. Thornfield's. Smaller, more precise, clearly feminine. Margaret Hale had indeed continued the work, creating a comprehensive guide for future generations of guardians. As the afternoon wore on, father and son worked together to understand the full scope of what they'd inherited. Dr. Thornfield's research network covered hundreds of miles of mountain wilderness with carefully hidden caches at strategic locations. Each site contained different elements of his work. Some held plant specimens, others contained research notes, and still others stored the equipment needed to locate and access the network. "We're not just treasure hunters," Jonas said finally. "We're the inheritors of a scientific legacy and a responsibility," Ollie added. "Dr. Thornfield trusted our family to make sure his discoveries were used properly." Jonas looked at his son, struck by the boy's mature understanding of the situation. At 12, Ollie grasped the complexity of their inheritance, the potential benefits, the moral obligations, and the risks that came with protecting something so valuable. "What do you think we should do?" Jonas asked. Ollie considered the question, with the same seriousness he brought to everything since his mother's death. "I think we need to learn more before we decide anything. Dr. Thornfield and our ancestor spent years building this network. We should understand what they built before we change anything." It was wisdom beyond his years, and Jonas felt a surge of pride in his son's thoughtful approach. Sarah would have been proud too. She'd always said that Ollie had the mind of a scientist, someone who gathered information before drawing conclusions. That evening, as they prepared for bed, Jonas found himself thinking about legacy in ways he never had before. He'd always assumed that his job as a father was to provide for Ollie's immediate needs and future education. But now they'd inherited something much more complex, a family tradition of protecting knowledge that could benefit humanity. "Dad?" Ollie's voice came from the loft. "Yeah, son. I'm glad Mom's stories brought us here. Even if she didn't know the whole truth, she knew this place was important to our family." Jonas touched the spot on his finger where Sarah's ring had been, remembering how he'd placed it beside the wildflower on their first night at the cabin. Maybe Sarah had known more than she'd realized. Maybe some truths were passed down through generations, not as facts, but as feelings, as an understanding that certain places and certain stories mattered in ways that couldn't be fully explained. Outside, their cabin, the mountain wilderness stretched in all directions, holding the secrets of Dr. Elias Thornfield and the continuing legacy of the Hale family guardians. Armed with Dr. Thornfield's compass and Margaret Hale's updated maps, Jonas and Ollie began their first expedition to one of the other cache sites. The location was only 2 miles from their cabin, but the terrain was challenging, a steep climb through dense forest to a rocky outcrop that overlooked the entire valley. Ollie had spent the previous evening studying the journal's botanical illustrations, memorizing the detailed drawings of plants that Dr. Thornfield had considered significant. His young mind seemed particularly adept at retaining the complex information, and he'd begun to understand some of the scientists' coding system for categorizing different species. "According to the map, we should find a marker stone about 50 feet from that dead pine tree," Jonas said, consulting Margaret's notations as they climbed. The compass device had proven remarkably accurate. When set to the proper coordinates, it pointed directly toward their destination, even when the terrain forced them to take indirect routes around obstacles. Dr. Thornfield had indeed created something far more sophisticated than a simple compass. There, Ollie pointed toward a rock formation that looked natural, but upon closer inspection showed signs of deliberate arrangement. That stack of stones is too regular to be accidental. They found the marker exactly where Margaret's map indicated. It should be. Hidden beneath the stones was another oiled cloth package, smaller than the cache they'd discovered in the cabin, but equally well preserved. This package contained pressed plant specimens, dozens of them, each labeled with Dr. Thornfield's precise handwriting. But unlike typical botanical specimens, these plants had been preserved using some technique that maintained not just their shape and color, but also what appeared to be their medicinal properties. After more than a century, the plant materials still retained their distinctive scents and characteristics. "Dad, look at this," Ollie said, examining a specimen labeled Helichrysum montanum, extraordinary wound-healing properties, active compounds stable for decades when properly preserved. Jonas read the label again. If Dr. Thornfield was correct, the pressed plant in Ollie's hands contained active medicinal compounds that remained potent after more than 130 years. The preservation technique alone would represent a major scientific advancement. "And this one," Ollie continued, pointing to another specimen, "Angelica thornfieldi, named for himself, I guess. The notes say it has remarkable efficacy for respiratory ailments, surpassing all known treatments." They carefully unpacked the entire collection, finding plants labeled with claims that would revolutionize modern medicine if proven accurate. Dr. Thornfield had documented treatments for conditions ranging from diabetes to cancer, from heart disease to neurological disorders. Each specimen was accompanied by detailed notes about preparation methods, dosage recommendations, and potential interactions with other treatments. "No wonder he was worried about the wrong people getting hold of this information," Jonas said. "If even half of these claims are accurate, we're looking at treatments worth billions of dollars to pharmaceutical companies. But that's not why Dr. Thornfield hid them," Ollie said, reading from one of the research notes. "Listen to this. The healing wisdom of these mountains belongs to all humanity, not to those who would exploit suffering for profit. Margaret understands that true medicine serves healing, not wealth." Jonas felt the weight of their inherited responsibility more keenly than ever. Dr. Thornfield hadn't hidden his research to deny it to the world. He'd hidden it to prevent its exploitation by people who would prioritize profit over healing. As they prepared to return to the cabin, Jonas noticed something that made him freeze. Fresh boot prints in the soft earth near the marker stone, leading away toward the main trail. "Someone else has been here," he said quietly. Ollie looked at the prints, his expression immediately serious. "Recently, very recently. These prints are from today, maybe even this morning." Jonas studied the tracks more carefully. They were large boots, possibly hiking boots, worn by someone with a long stride who moved confidently through the wilderness. They packed up the plant specimens quickly and began their descent toward the cabin, both father and son now alert for any signs that they were being watched or followed. The mountain forest that had felt peaceful and protective during their climb now seemed full of potential hiding places for unwelcome observers. "Do you think it was Dr. Chen?" Ollie asked as they navigated a particularly steep section of the trail. "Maybe. Or maybe someone else who's interested in Dr. Thornfield's work." Jonas realized that their discovery might not be as secret as he'd hoped. If Dr. Chen represented legitimate scientific interest, there could also be less legitimate parties searching for the same information. When they reached the cabin, Jonas immediately noticed that something was wrong. Their solar panels had been repositioned, angled differently than Jonas had left them that morning. It was a subtle change, but Jonas had become meticulous about the cabin's systems during their weeks of mountain living. "Stay close to me," he told Ollie quietly. A careful inspection revealed other small signs of intrusion. The woodpile had been disturbed, with logs restacked in a slightly different pattern. The cabin door, which Jonas always left latched in a specific way, showed signs of having been opened and carefully relatched. "Someone's been inside," Jonas said. They approached the cabin cautiously. Jonas retrieved a tire iron from his truck. Before entering, though he hoped whoever had been there was long gone. The interior appeared undisturbed at first glance, but Jonas's systematic check revealed the subtle signs of a professional search. Books had been moved and replaced. Drawers had been opened and carefully closed, and the dust patterns on shelves showed where someone had lifted and examined their belongings. Most importantly, the hearthstone concealing their primary cache remained undisturbed. Either the intruder hadn't discovered their secret, or they'd been interrupted before they could investigate thoroughly. They were looking for something specific, Jonas said. This wasn't random vandalism. Someone searched our home systematically. Dr. Thornfield's research, Ollie said. Probably, but they didn't find it. Jonas felt a mixture of relief and growing unease. Their secret was still safe, but they were clearly no longer alone in their interest in Dr. Thornfield's legacy. That evening, as they examined the plant specimens they'd retrieved, Jonas couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The cabin windows, which had always seemed like pleasant connections to the mountain landscape, now felt like vulnerabilities. Anyone with binoculars and a position on the surrounding ridges could observe their activities. "Dad, I've been thinking about what Dr. Chen said," Ollie said, carefully placing a preserved plant specimen back in its protective wrapping. "About Dr. Thornfield's research being important for modern medicine." "What about it?" "Well, if these plants really do have the healing properties Dr. Thornfield documented, then keeping them hidden might not be protecting them. It might be preventing them from helping people who need them." It was a profound observation, and Jonas realized that his 12-year-old son had identified the central moral challenge of their inheritance. Dr. Thornfield and Margaret Hale had hidden the research to prevent its exploitation, but in doing so they had also prevented its benefits from reaching people who could be healed. "So, what do you think we should do?" Ollie considered the question with his characteristic thoughtfulness. "Maybe we need to find someone we can trust. Someone who understands science, but who also cares more about helping people than making money. Someone like Dr. Chen? Maybe. But how can we know for sure that she's trustworthy? And what if she's not the only one looking for Dr. Thornfield's work?" As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of approaching vehicles interrupted their discussion. Jonas quickly secured the plant specimens, while Ollie peered out the window. "2 trucks," the boy reported, "coming up the logging road fast." Jonas felt his protective instincts flare as he moved to the window. The approaching vehicles were moving with purpose, not the careful navigation of casual visitors. Their headlights cut through the growing dusk like searchlights, and the sound of their engines suggested powerful, well-maintained equipment. "Get your pack," Jonas told Ollie. "Take only what you absolutely need." "Are we leaving?" "We might need to." Jonas grabbed their emergency supplies: water, food, basic camping gear, and most importantly, Dr. Thornfield's journal and compass. If they had to run, they couldn't leave behind the most crucial elements of their discovery. The trucks pulled into their clearing with military precision, positioning themselves to block the logging road. Jonas counted at least 6 people emerging from the vehicles, all wearing dark clothing and moving with the coordinated efficiency of a professional team. "This isn't Dr. Chen," Jonas said grimly. A man who appeared to be the team leader approached the cabin while his colleagues spread out to surround the building. He was tall, well-built, and carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. "Mr. Hale," the man called out. "My name is Marcus Greystone. I represent certain interests that have been searching for materials that may be located on your property. We'd like to discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement." Jonas didn't respond. Immediately, the man's tone was polite, but the tactical positioning of his team suggested that refusal wasn't really an option they were prepared to accept. "What kind of materials?" Jonas called back. "Historical items, scientific research, documents and artifacts that have been missing for many years." Greystone's voice remained conversational, but Jonas could hear the steel underneath. We're prepared to offer substantial compensation for your cooperation. And if we're not interested in cooperating, let's hope it doesn't come to that, Mr. Hale. You have a young son to think about." The implied threat was unmistakable. Jonas felt his anger flare, but he forced himself to remain calm. These people had done their research. Ollie knew about their situation and had come prepared to use that knowledge as leverage. "What do you want me to do?" Jonas asked, buying time to think. "Simply allow my team to conduct a thorough search of your property. If we find what we're looking for, you'll be compensated generously for your assistance. If we don't find it, we'll leave you in peace." Jonas knew that neither outcome was likely to be as simple as Greystone suggested. If they found Dr. Thornfield's research, Jonas and Ollie would become loose ends who knew too much about the discovery. If they didn't find it, they'd assume Jonas was hiding it and apply more serious pressure. "I need to talk to my son," Jonas said. "Of course, take your time. We're not going anywhere." Jonas moved away from the window and found Ollie waiting with their emergency packs ready. "The back window," the boy whispered. Jonas nodded. They'd identified escape routes during their first week at the cabin, more as a mental exercise than serious preparation. Now that preparation might save their lives. "Stay close to me and stay quiet. We'll work our way up the ridge behind the cabin, then circle around to where I hid the truck's spare keys." Jonas had stashed emergency supplies and vehicle keys in several locations around their property, lessons learned from his National Guard training about operational security. They slipped out through the cabin's back window and into the forest beyond. Jonas led the way, using the terrain and vegetation to mask their movement while putting distance between themselves and Greystone's team. Behind them, they could hear voices as the search began. These people were professional and thorough, but they'd made the mistake of assuming that Jonas was just a desperate single father who could be easily intimidated. They were about to learn that some fathers would do anything to protect their children, and that Dr. Thornfield's legacy had found guardians who understood the true meaning of responsibility. Jonas and Ollie spent the night hidden in a natural shelter formed by fallen logs and granite boulders, approximately 2 miles from their cabin. From their concealed position, they could see the lights of Greystone's search operation continuing well into the early morning hours. "They're being very thorough," Ollie whispered, watching the systematic sweep of flashlight beams across the landscape. "Professional treasure hunters," Jonas replied quietly. "This isn't their first time looking for something valuable." By dawn, the search vehicles had departed, but Jonas wasn't naive enough to believe they were truly alone. Greystone's team had likely left surveillance equipment or personnel to monitor the cabin in case Jonas and Ollie returned. "We need to assume they'll be watching the cabin from now on," Jonas said, as they shared a breakfast of granola bars and water from their emergency supplies. "And we need to understand more about what we're protecting before we make any decisions about who to trust." Ollie pulled out Dr. Thornfield's journal, which Jonas had grabbed during their hasty departure. "Maybe we should visit more of the cache sites. If Dr. Thornfield really did create a network of hiding places, we need to know what else is out there." Jonas studied Margaret Hale's updated map. She had marked 17 different locations across the northern Rockies, connected by what appeared to be travel routes and communication points. Some sites were marked with symbols indicating plant collections, others seemed to contain research equipment, and a few were designated as coordination points, with notations suggesting they contained information about the entire network. This one, Jonas pointed to a location about 10 miles north of their position. "Margaret's notes say it's a master index site. That might tell us what Dr. Thornfield was really building here." The hike took them through terrain that tested both their physical endurance and Jonas's navigation skills. Dr. Thornfield's compass proved invaluable, pointing accurately toward their destination, even when the mountain topography forced them to take indirect routes around cliffs and dense forest. The cache site was hidden in a natural cave system, carefully concealed behind what appeared to be a rockfall, but was actually a deliberately constructed barrier. Inside, they discovered Dr. Thornfield's most comprehensive documentation of his research network. "Dad, this is incredible," Ollie said, examining a detailed three-dimensional map carved into the cave wall. He didn't just hide his research, he built an entire communication system. The carved map showed the same 17 locations as Margaret's. Drawings, but with additional detail that revealed the true sophistication of Dr. Thornfield's planning. Each site was connected to others by sightlines and signal points, creating a network that would allow the Guardians to communicate across vast distances using mirrors, smoke signals, or other methods that wouldn't require modern technology. "Look at these supply caches," Jonas said, studying another section of the carved map. "Food, equipment, weapons, everything someone would need to maintain the network independently for months at a time." They found additional documentation that explained Dr. Thornfield's thinking. The botanist had realized that his discoveries would eventually attract attention from powerful interests, and he designed the Guardian network to be self-sufficient and defensible. Each location could function independently, but together they formed a comprehensive system for protecting and preserving the research. "Here's something about our cabin," Ollie said, reading from a leather portfolio they'd discovered. "Dr. Thornfield calls it the primary residence, where the Chief Guardian family would maintain the central coordination." Jonas read over his son's shoulder. According to Dr. Thornfield's documents, the Hale family cabin wasn't just another hiding place. It was the command center for the entire network. The other sites were designed to support and protect the primary location, creating layers of security around the most important materials. "That's why Greystone's people were so focused on our cabin," Jonas realized. "If they know about the network structure, they know that's where the most valuable information would be kept." "But they didn't find it," Ollie pointed out. "Not yet. But they'll be back." Among the documents in the cave, they found correspondence between Dr. Thornfield and Margaret Hale that revealed the full scope of their relationship. Margaret hadn't just been a romantic partner. She'd been an equal collaborator in the research, bringing her own expertise in botany and pharmacology to their work. "She was a scientist too," Ollie said, reading one of her research notes. "Look at these chemical analyses. She was studying the active compounds in Dr. Thornfield's plant specimens." Jonas examined Margaret's work. Her research was sophisticated and thorough, building on Dr. Thornfield's botanical discoveries with detailed chemical analysis and medical applications. Together, they had created something far more valuable than simple plant collections. They had developed comprehensive treatments based on rigorous scientific methodology. "And she continued the work after he disappeared," Jonas said, finding dated entries that extended well into the 1890s. "She spent years refining the treatments and expanding the network." One document, dated 1894, provided crucial information about Margaret's concerns. "The mining interests grow more aggressive each year, stripping the mountains of everything valuable without regard for the delicate ecosystems that sustain Elias's discoveries. I have hidden the most crucial materials and established protocols for future generations, but I fear the time may come when the Guardians must choose between secrecy and the greater good. The healing knowledge we protect could save thousands of lives, but only if it reaches the right people at the right time." "She was struggling with the same question we are," Ollie said. "When do you share information that could help people, and when do you keep it hidden to protect it?" Jonas found additional documents that showed Margaret's solution to this dilemma. She had established contact with several trusted medical researchers and had begun selectively sharing some of Dr. Thornfield's less sensitive discoveries, always through intermediaries and never revealing the full scope of the research network. She created a controlled release system, Jonas realized. Information that could help people got out, but the sources and methods stayed protected, so we don't have to choose between helping people and keeping the secret, Ollie said. "We can do both, if we're careful about it." As they prepared to leave the cave, Jonas spotted something that made him freeze. Fresh boot prints in the dust near the cave entrance, the same distinctive tread pattern they'd seen at the previous cache site. "Someone else knows about this location," he said quietly. They gathered the most crucial documents quickly and prepared for another tactical withdrawal. As they reached the cave entrance, Jonas heard the sound of approaching voices echoing off. "The rock walls of the canyon below, multiple people," he whispered to Ollie, "moving systematically like a search pattern." They waited in the shadows until the voices passed, then slipped out of the cave and began working their way up the ridge through terrain too steep for casual hikers to follow. Jonas's National Guard training in mountain operations was proving invaluable, but he was concerned about Ollie's ability to maintain the pace and stealth required to stay ahead of their pursuers. "I can keep up, Dad," Ollie said, as if reading his father's thoughts. "Mom always said I was tougher than I looked." They spent the rest of the day moving through the wilderness, using Dr. Thornfield's network of signal points and supply caches to stay ahead of Greystone's search teams. The botanists' planning was remarkable. Each location provided exactly what they needed to reach the next position safely. As evening approached, they found shelter at another network site, this one containing preserved food supplies and communication. Equipment that Margaret Hale had maintained decades earlier. "Dad," Ollie said as they settled in for the night, "I think I know what we need to do." "What's that, son?" "We need to contact Dr. Chen, but we need to do it carefully. If she's really trying to continue Dr. Thornfield's work for the right reasons, she might be able to help us protect the network from people like Greystone. And if she's not trustworthy, then we'll find someone else, but we can't protect this by ourselves forever. Dr. Thornfield and Margaret built the network because they knew future generations would need help." Jonas looked at his son, struck by the maturity in his reasoning. At 12 years old, Ollie understood something that had taken Jonas days to grasp, that their role as guardians didn't mean they had to face every challenge alone. "You're right," Jonas said, "but we need to be very careful about how we approach her, and we need to be prepared for the possibility that trusting anyone might put us in more danger." "I know," Ollie said, "but sometimes you have to take risks to do what's right." Outside their shelter, the mountain wilderness stretched in all directions, holding the secrets of Dr. Elias Thornfield's remarkable legacy and the continuing story of the guardians who protected it. The morning after their night at the supply cache, Jonas and Ollie discovered something that changed their understanding of everything they thought they knew about their situation. Hidden within Margaret Hale's preserved supplies, Ollie found a sealed envelope addressed in faded ink, "For Jonas Hale, when the time of choosing arrives." The handwriting was different from both Dr. Thornfield's precise script and Margaret's elegant cursive. This was written by someone from a later generation. "How could someone know your name decades before you were born?" Ollie asked, as Jonas carefully opened the envelope. The letter inside was dated 1952 and signed by Thomas Hale, Jonas's grandfather, who had died when Jonas was just a child. "My dear grandson," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then the family responsibility has passed to your generation, and the time has come to reveal truths that we have kept hidden for more than 60 years. Jonas felt his hands trembling as he continued reading. His grandfather's letter revealed that the Hale family's role as guardians of Dr. Thornfield's research had never been forgotten. It had been carefully maintained by each generation, passed down through private family traditions that were disguised as simple mountain stories. "Your grandmother, Sarah—" Jonas stopped reading abruptly. "What is it, Dad? My grandmother's name was Sarah, just like your mother." Jonas realized that the family connections ran even deeper than they'd understood. Your mother wasn't just named after some distant ancestor. She was named after the previous generation's guardian. The letter continued with revelations that reframed everything they thought they understood about their family history. Margaret Hale established protocols, that each generation of guardians would receive the truth when circumstances required it. Your great-grandfather received the knowledge during the Great Depression, when economic desperation threatened the security of our remote properties. I received it during World War II, when government researchers were systematically cataloging all natural resources that might support the war effort. So every generation has known, Ollie said. They just waited until it was necessary to act on the knowledge. According to this, Jonas continued reading, your mother was supposed to receive the guardianship when she turned 30. But she was already fighting cancer by then, and my father decided the burden was too great to add to her struggles. The letter explained that Jonas's grandfather had made the difficult decision to let the knowledge pass to the next generation, hoping that Jonas would discover the truth naturally if and when circumstances required it. He couldn't have known that losing Mom would bring us here, Jonas said quietly. Maybe he did know, Ollie suggested. Maybe he understood that sometimes the hardest times in life are when people need to find their real purpose. The letter contained additional information that was immediately practical. Detailed descriptions of all 17 network sites, communication codes that would identify Jonas to other Guardian families, and most importantly, contact information for allies who had been helping to protect the network for decades. There are other families, Jonas read. The Chens have been maintaining the scientific analysis of Dr. Thornfield's plant specimens since the 1920s. Dr. Margaret Chen isn't just a university researcher. She's a fourth-generation Guardian whose family has been working with ours for almost a century. The revelation was stunning. Dr. Chen's visit to their cabin hadn't been coincidental. She'd been checking on the primary guardians, probably alerted by some monitoring system that Jonas didn't yet understand. But then why? Didn't she tell us who she was? Ollie asked. Jonas found the answer in another section of his grandfather's letter. Guardian protocols require that knowledge be shared only when the primary family demonstrates readiness and genuine commitment to the responsibility. Dr. Chen would have been testing our trustworthiness and dedication before revealing the full truth. So we passed some kind of test without knowing we were taking it, Ollie said. Apparently. But there's more, Jonas continued, reading, and what he discovered made him understand why Greystone's people had been so persistent. According to this, someone's been trying to locate and exploit the network for decades. Corporate interests, private collectors, even foreign governments have sent people to search for Dr. Thornfield's research. The letter detailed several previous attempts to breach the network's security, including a serious incident in the 1970s, when industrial spies had nearly located the primary cache. Each time, the Guardian families had worked together to protect the research and relocate materials as necessary. But this time is different, Jonas read. The people searching now have resources and technology that earlier generations didn't have to contend with. Satellite surveillance, electronic detection equipment, professional intelligence operatives. They're not just treasure hunters anymore. Jonas's grandfather had anticipated this escalation and had prepared accordingly. Hidden within the network were not just research materials, but also evidence of the corporate conspiracy to steal Dr. Thornfield's discoveries, documentation that could be used to expose the illegal activities and protect the Guardians through legal means. Grandpa was setting up a trap, Jonas realized. If someone like Greystone ever got close to finding the research, we'd have the evidence to destroy them legally before they could exploit what they'd found. The final section of the letter contained instructions for initiating contact with the other Guardian families and coordinating a response to the current threat. Dr. Chen would serve as the scientific coordinator, while other families would handle legal, financial, and security aspects of protecting the network. We're not alone in this, Ollie said, reading over his father's shoulder. We never were alone. As if summoned by their discovery, the sound of an approaching helicopter interrupted their morning. Jonas quickly secured his grandfather's letter. while Ollie looked for the source of the aircraft noise. "It's landing in the clearing near the cache entrance," Ollie reported. "Military-style helicopter, but no government markings." Jonas felt his protective instincts flare, but his grandfather's letter had provided crucial information about dealing with advanced surveillance and pursuit. The Guardian network included protocols for exactly this situation. "Get the emergency beacon," Jonas instructed, referring to a device they'd found among Margaret Hale's supplies. According to his grandfather's letter, the beacon would send a coded signal to all other Guardian families, alerting them that the primary site was under threat. As Jonas activated the beacon, he saw figures emerging from the helicopter and beginning to search the canyon systematically. These weren't Greystone's usual operatives. These people had military training and equipment that suggested government or corporate backing at the highest levels. "Dad, look at this," Ollie said, pointing to a section of Margaret Hale's carved map they hadn't noticed before. Hidden among the topographical details was a route marked Emergency Exodus, Primary to Secondary Command. The route led from their current position to another site deeper in the wilderness, designated as a backup command center that could coordinate network operations if the primary location was compromised. Margaret planned for this, Jonas said. She knew that eventually the primary Guardians might need to abandon the original cabin and operate from hidden locations. As the search team began working their way up the canyon toward the cave, Jonas and Ollie gathered the most crucial documents and began following Margaret's emergency route. Behind them, they could hear voices and equipment, but ahead lay a path that had been prepared more than a century ago by someone who understood that protecting knowledge sometimes required sacrifice. "Are we giving up the cabin?" Ollie asked. As they climbed, "We're protecting what matters most," Jonas replied. "The cabin was just a building. The real treasure is the knowledge and the responsibility that comes with it." As they reached the first waypoint on Margaret's emergency route, Jonas paused to look back at the search operation below. Greystone's people thought they were hunting treasure, but they had no understanding of what they were really trying to steal. Dr. Thornfield's research wasn't just about valuable plants, it was about a legacy of healing that had been protected by generations of families who understood that some things were more important than money. The emergency beacon continued, its coded transmission sending word to Guardian families across the region that the time had come to choose between secrecy and action. After more than a century of quiet protection, the network was about to reveal itself in ways that would change everything. Jonas looked at his son, who was studying Margaret's route with the same focused determination that had marked all his decisions since they'd begun this journey. At 12 years old, Ollie was about to become part of something much larger than either of them had imagined. Not just the guardians of a family secret, but protectors of knowledge that could heal the world. The emergency beacon signal was answered within hours. As Jonas and Ollie made their way along Margaret Hale's emergency route, they began encountering other Guardian families emerging from locations throughout the mountain region. The first contact came at a rendezvous point marked on Margaret's map, a natural amphitheater hidden in a box canyon where Dr. Thornfield had apparently held meetings with his research collaborators. A woman in hiking gear was waiting for them, and Jonas recognized her immediately. "Dr. Chen," he called out. "Jonas, Ollie," she smiled, but her expression was serious. "I'm glad you're both safe. When the beacon activated, we knew Greystone had escalated beyond standard corporate espionage. You've been monitoring us the entire time," Jonas said. "Protecting you," Dr. Chen corrected. "My family has been maintaining surveillance of all Guardian families for 4 generations. We've learned that the people who hunt for Dr. Thornfield's research aren't deterred by polite refusal." As they talked, other people began arriving at the rendezvous point. Jonas counted at least a dozen individuals, ranging from teenagers to elderly adults, all carrying equipment and supplies that suggested they'd been preparing for this gathering for some time. "How many Guardian families are there?" Ollie asked. 17, replied an elderly man who introduced himself as Robert Martinez. One for each of the primary cache sites, though some families have been maintaining multiple locations for generations. Dr. Chen began explaining the situation as the group gathered around a detailed topographical map spread on a fallen log. Greystone's operation isn't just treasure hunting anymore. Our intelligence suggests he's working with pharmaceutical corporations and possibly foreign interests who want to reverse engineer Dr. Thornfield's discoveries for commercial exploitation. What kind of intelligence? Jonas asked. A younger man stepped forward, introducing himself as David Park. My family handles the financial and legal monitoring of threats to the network. We've been tracking Greystone's funding sources and his recent equipment purchases. He's acquired military-grade surveillance equipment, geological sensors, and has hired personnel with special forces backgrounds. And he's not working alone, added a middle-aged woman named Lisa Blackhorse. Satellite imagery shows coordinated search operations at multiple network sites. This isn't one man with a team. This is a systematic effort to map and control the entire network. Jonas felt the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. What had begun as a personal discovery had escalated into something that threatened. Generations of careful protection work. What are our options? He asked. Dr. Chen pulled out a device that looked like Dr. Thornfield's compass, but clearly incorporated modern technology. Your grandfather's letter mentioned evidence of corporate conspiracy. We've been documenting illegal surveillance, trespassing, and attempted theft for months. We have enough evidence to destroy Greystone's operation legally, but only if we can coordinate our response properly. The Guardian's key, said Robert Martinez, producing an ornate brass device similar to the compass Jonas had found. Each Guardian family has maintained one. When brought together, they activate Dr. Thornfield's master system. Jonas pulled out his own compass, and as the various Guardians arranged their devices in a circle, something remarkable happened. The instruments began resonating with each other, their dials aligning and their crystal lenses focusing to create a complex optical display. Dr. Thornfield built the entire network to function as one coordinated system. Dr. Chen explained, as the devices continued their synchronized operation. Individual sites can be located and exploited, but the network as a whole has protective mechanisms that can only be activated when all the Guardian keys are brought together. The display created by the combined instruments showed a real-time view of the entire mountain region, with indicators marking every network site and the current status of each location. Several sites showed red markers indicating active intrusion by Greystone's teams. He's already found 4 cache sites, Lisa Blackhorse observed. But look, he hasn't been able to access the primary materials at any of them. Dr. Thornfield's security system, Robert Martinez explained to Jonas and Ollie. Each site has multiple layers of protection. Finding the location is just the first step. Actually accessing the materials requires the proper combination of Guardian, keys and knowledge that's only available when the network operates collectively. Jonas began to understand the true genius of Dr. Thornfield's design. The botanist hadn't just hidden his research, he'd created a system that required cooperation and legitimate guardianship to access treasure hunters and corporate raiders. And could find individual sites, but they couldn't exploit what they found without the participation of the Guardian families. So, what's Greystone's endgame? Ollie asked. David Park pointed to indicators on the display showing movement toward the primary cabin site. He's realized that the individual caches are protected, so he's focusing all his resources on finding and controlling the central command location. If he can take the primary site and hold it, he can try to force the Guardian families to cooperate. Using us as leverage, Jonas said. Exactly, but he's made a crucial mistake. Dr. Chen adjusted her Guardian key, and the display zoomed in on the cabin area. He assumes the primary guardians are helpless civilians who can be intimidated or bought. He doesn't understand what kind of people Dr. Thornfield and Margaret Hale chose as the foundation of their network. Jonas felt something shift inside him as he watched the tactical display. For months, he'd been thinking of himself as a desperate single father trying to survive and provide for his son. But his grandfather's letter and the presence of these other guardian families made him realize that he was part of something much larger and more important. "What do you need me to do?" he asked. "We need you and Ollie to return to the primary site," Dr. Chen said. "Not to the cabin, that's compromised, but to the true primary site that only the Central Guardians can access." She pointed to a location on the display that Jonas didn't recognize, though it appeared to be somewhere near their property. Dr. Thornfield's original laboratory, Robert Martinez explained, hidden beneath the natural hot springs about a mile from your cabin. Margaret Hale maintained it for decades, but access has been sealed since the 1960s, waiting for the time when the network would need to operate at full capacity. The other Guardian families will coordinate our legal and security response, Dr. Chen continued, but the network's defensive and communication systems can only be activated from the primary laboratory and only by the Central Guardian family. Jonas looked at Ollie, who was studying the tactical display with focused intensity. "What do you think, son?" "I think we've been running and hiding long enough," Ollie said. "Dr. Thornfield and our ancestors built this network to protect something important. Maybe it's time to stop protecting it by keeping it secret and start protecting it by making sure the right people can benefit from it." The wisdom in his 12-year-old son's words struck Jonas profoundly. They'd been thinking about their inheritance in terms of what they could preserve, but perhaps the real responsibility was ensuring that Dr. Thornfield's research could fulfill its intended purpose of healing. "All right," Jonas said. "Tell us how to find the primary laboratory." Dr. Chen began outlining a complex plan that would coordinate the Guardian family's response while positioning Jonas and Ollie to activate the network's master systems. Other Guardians would provide distractions and misdirection to keep Greystone's teams away from the true primary site, while legal and media preparations would ensure that any discoveries would be properly documented and protected. "And there's one more thing," Dr. Chen said, as the planning session concluded. "Once you activate the primary laboratory, there's no going back to secrecy. The network will be revealed, Dr. Thornfield's research will become public knowledge, and your lives will change permanently." Jonas considered the implications. The quiet mountain existence he'd hoped to build with Ollie would be impossible once they became the public faces of Dr. Thornfield's legacy. But perhaps that quiet existence had never been their real destination. Perhaps they'd been meant for something larger all along. "Sarah always said that everything happens for a reason," Jonas told his son. "Maybe losing everything we thought we wanted was necessary so we could find what we were really meant to protect." As the Guardian families prepared to disperse and begin their coordinated response, Jonas felt a sense of purpose that had been missing from his life since Sarah's death. He wasn't just a desperate father trying to provide for his child. He was the inheritor of a legacy that could change the world and the guardian of knowledge that could heal suffering for generations to come. The network that Dr. Elias Thornfield and Margaret Hale had created was about to reveal itself, and Jonas and Ollie would stand at its center, not as victims of circumstance, but as the protectors of one of history's most important scientific discoveries. The approach to Dr. Thornfield's hidden laboratory required Jonas and Ollie to move through terrain that seemed designed to discourage exploration. Following Dr. Chen's directions, they worked their way along a narrow game trail that led to the natural hot springs, but accessing the laboratory entrance required navigating a maze of thermal features and unstable ground that would be treacherous for anyone who didn't know the precise route. "There!" Ollie pointed to a rock formation that looked natural, but showed subtle signs of human modification. Steam rose from mineral deposits around its base, and the sulfur smell of the hot springs masked any other sense that might reveal the presence of concealed entrances. Jonas consulted the Guardian key, which now displayed detailed navigation information that hadn't been available when he'd used it as a simple compass. The device indicated they were within 50 feet of the laboratory entrance, but the exact location wasn't immediately obvious. Margaret's notes said to look for the eagle's nest, Jonas said, referring to instructions Dr. Chen had provided from her family's archives. Ollie studied the rock formations above them and spotted what he was looking for, a natural depression in the cliff face that had been modified to resemble a large bird's nest. Carved into the rock beneath it was a symbol that matched markings on their Guardian key. The entrance is behind the waterfall, Ollie realized, pointing to where hot spring water cascaded down the rock face in a curtain of steam and mineral-rich liquid. They worked their way carefully around the thermal features, testing each step on ground that could shift from solid rock to scalding mud without warning. Jonas led the way, using techniques from his National Guard training to navigate hazardous terrain while keeping Ollie safely behind him. The space behind the waterfall was larger than expected, a natural cave system that had been expanded and modified by human hands. The Guardian key's display indicated they were close to the laboratory entrance, and Jonas could see artificial lighting fixtures that suggested the facility still had power after all these decades. "Dad, look at this!" Ollie called out, examining what appeared to be a solid rock wall. The surface showed tool marks and fitted joints that revealed it was actually a carefully crafted door designed to be invisible from casual observation. Jonas inserted the Guardian key into a concealed mechanism, and the stone door pivoted inward with surprising smoothness. Beyond it lay Dr. Thornfield's most carefully guarded secret, a fully equipped research laboratory that looked like it could have been abandoned yesterday rather than decades ago. The laboratory was remarkable in its preservation and sophistication. Electric lighting, illuminated workbenches covered with scientific instruments that combined 19th century craftsmanship with innovations that seemed decades ahead of their time. Glass vessels contained plant specimens in various stages of preparation, and detailed charts covered the walls showing chemical analyses and therapeutic applications. "It's like a time capsule," Ollie said, moving carefully among the equipment. "Everything is exactly as Dr. Thornfield and Margaret left it." Jonas activated additional lighting systems and began exploring the facility systematically. The laboratory was larger than it had appeared from the entrance, extending deep into the mountain through a series of chambers dedicated to different aspects of the research. One chamber contained what appeared to be a botanical library, thousands of pressed specimens, detailed illustrations, and research notes documenting plant species from across the American West. Another room housed chemical analysis equipment and pharmaceutical preparation facilities that would have been cutting edge for any era. But the most impressive discovery was the central command chamber, where Dr. Thornfield had installed an early communication system that connected all 17 network sites. The equipment looked like a combination of telegraph technology and something much more advanced, incorporating techniques that Jonas didn't immediately recognize. The emergency beacon, Jonas realized, examining the communication equipment. "All our signals have been routing through this facility automatically." As if responding to his words, the communication system activated, displaying status information from Guardian families across the region. Jonas could see real-time updates on Greystone's search operations, the locations of various team members, and coordinate responses from the other Guardians. "Dr. Chen's team is in position near our cabin," Ollie reported, reading from one of the display screens. "And David Park says the legal documentation is ready to file as soon as we give the signal." Jonas found the master control station, an elaborate console that incorporated elements from all 17 Guardian keys into a single unified system. When he placed their key into the central mechanism, the entire facility came to full operational status. Suddenly, detailed maps appeared on wall-mounted displays, showing the complete network with unprecedented clarity. Each site was marked, not just with its location, but with real-time information about its current status, security measures, and the specific research materials it contained. "Dad, this is incredible," Ollie said, studying a display that showed the full scope of Dr. Thornfield's discoveries. His research wasn't just about individual plants. He was mapping the therapeutic ecosystem of the entire Rocky Mountain region. Jonas began to understand the true significance of what they'd inherited. Dr. Thornfield hadn't just found some valuable plants. He'd identified complex relationships between different species, environmental conditions, and human health that represented a completely new approach to medicine. "Look at this treatment protocol," Ollie continued, pointing to a detailed chart. He was combining multiple plant extracts in specific ratios to create medicines that were more effective than any single ingredient. The master communication system began receiving signals from the other Guardian families. Dr. Chen's voice came through clearly on the facility's audio system. "Jonas, we have multiple teams converging on your area. Greystone has brought in serious reinforcements, military contractors with heavy equipment. Are you ready to initiate the protective protocols?" Jonas looked at his son, who was examining the facility's defensive systems with the focused attention he brought to everything that captured his interest. "What do you think, Ollie? Once we activate these systems, there's no going back to being just a father and son trying to start over." Ollie considered the question with his characteristic thoughtfulness. "We haven't been just a father and son for weeks now, Dad. We've been guardians of something important. The only question is whether we're ready to do the job properly." Jonas felt a surge of pride in his son's maturity and wisdom. At 12 years old, Ollie understood the weight of their responsibility and was prepared to accept it fully. "All right," Jonas said, placing his hands on the master control system. "Dr. Chen, we're initiating full network activation. Tell everyone to be ready. We're about to find out what Dr. Thornfield really built here." As the systems came online, displays throughout the laboratory began showing real-time information from all 17 network sites. The Guardian families were coordinating their response, law enforcement was being briefed on Greystone's illegal activities, and media contacts were prepared to document the revelation of Dr. Thornfield's research. But most importantly, the defensive systems that had protected the network for over a century were activating for the first time since their creation. Jonas was about to discover that Dr. Thornfield had been far more than just a botanist. He'd been a strategic genius who had anticipated every threat his research might face. The full activation of Dr. Thornfield's network revealed capabilities that exceeded even Dr. Chen's family's understanding of the system. As Jonas worked through the master control protocols, defensive measures that had been dormant for decades began responding to the current threat. "Dad, look at this," Ollie called out from a display showing topographical data around their cabin. "The system is tracking every person in Greystone's operation, their exact locations, their equipment, even their communications." Jonas examined the tactical display in amazement. Dr. Thornfield had somehow incorporated surveillance capabilities into his network that could monitor activity across hundreds of square miles of wilderness. The system was showing him that Greystone had deployed more than 30 operatives in a coordinated search pattern that was systematically working toward the laboratory's location. "How is this possible?" Jonas asked, speaking into the communication system. Dr. Chen's voice responded immediately. "My grandfather's notes mention that Dr. Thornfield collaborated with inventors and engineers who were decades ahead of their time. The network incorporates technologies that were never publicly revealed. The master console displayed a menu of options that included defensive measures Jonas hadn't expected. The network could disrupt electronic communications, trigger controlled landslides to block access routes, and activate warning systems that would alert law enforcement across the region. It's like he built a comprehensive security system for the entire mountain range, Ollie observed, because he understood that protecting knowledge sometimes requires force, Jonas said, reading from Dr. Thornfield's operational manual. He knew that people would eventually try to take his research by violence if they couldn't obtain it through legitimate means. The communication system crackled with reports from the other Guardian families. David Park's voice came through clearly. Legal. Documents are filed with federal authorities. We have warrants being issued for Greystone's arrest on charges of trespassing, industrial espionage, and conspiracy to steal protected scientific research. How long until law enforcement arrives? Jonas asked. FBI team is en route from Helena, but they won't reach your location for at least 2 hours, Lisa Blackhorse reported. Greystone's people will reach the laboratory area within 30 minutes if they maintain their current pace. Jonas felt the weight of decision settling on his shoulders. The defensive systems could stop Greystone's advance, but using them would transform their situation from protection to active confrontation. What would Dr. Thornfield do? Ollie asked, as if reading his father's thoughts. Jonas found the answer in the operational manual. The network's defensive capabilities exist to protect not just the research materials, but the principle that knowledge belongs to humanity rather than to those who would exploit it for personal gain. When faced with a choice between compromise and resistance, Guardians must remember that some things are worth fighting for. The tactical display showed Greystone's teams beginning to converge. On the Hot Springs area, their advance was professional and coordinated, suggesting they had identified the laboratory's approximate location through their own surveillance methods. Jonas, Dr. Chen's voice came through the communication system. We're seeing unusual activity from Greystone's main team. They're not just searching anymore. They're setting up some kind of excavation equipment near the springs. Jonas switched the display to show real-time video from concealed cameras around the laboratory perimeter. Greystone's people were indeed preparing for major excavation, using equipment that could breach the laboratory's concealed entrances through brute force. They're going to destroy the site to access it, Jonas realized, even if they can't operate the systems properly. They can steal the physical research materials. The communication system activated with an incoming signal from an unexpected source. A new voice, authoritative and precise, came through clearly. This is Dr. Sarah Thornfield Chen, calling from the Federal Research Center in Denver. I am the great-great-granddaughter of Dr. Elias Thornfield, and I am requesting immediate activation of the network's emergency protocols. Jonas looked at Ollie in surprise. They'd known Dr. Chen was connected to the Guardian families, but this revealed that Dr. Thornfield himself had living descendants who were part of the network. Dr. Thornfield Chen, Jonas responded. This is Jonas Hale at the primary laboratory. What emergency protocols? The research my ancestor protected has applications that extend far beyond medicine. His botanical discoveries include the foundation for environmental remediation techniques that could address climate change, pollution cleanup, and ecosystem restoration on a global scale. If Greystone succeeds in stealing and commercializing the research, those applications could be lost forever. The revelation added new dimensions to the stakes they were facing. Jonas had been thinking about protecting valuable medical research, but Dr. Thornfield's work apparently included solutions to environmental problems that could affect the entire planet. What do you need us to do? Jonas asked. Full network activation, with complete data transmission to federal authorities and international research institutions. We need to make Dr. Thornfield's complete research publicly available before Greystone can steal and suppress it. Jonas looked at the master console, which displayed options for comprehensive data transmission. The system could upload decades of research to multiple locations simultaneously, ensuring that the information would be preserved and available regardless of what happened to the physical sites. Ollie, Jonas said, This is it. Once we transmit all this information, Dr. Thornfield's research becomes public knowledge. Scientists around the world will have access to his discoveries, but we'll also lose our ability to control how they're used. His son studied the display showing Greystone's teams preparing their excavation equipment. Dr. Thornfield didn't hide his research to keep it secret forever, Dad. He hid it until the right time to release it. Maybe that time is now. Jonas realized that Ollie was right. The network hadn't been designed for permanent secrecy. It had been created to ensure that Dr. Thornfield's discoveries would be revealed when they could do the most good and when they were most needed. Dr. Thornfield Chen, all Guardian families, Jonas said into the communication system. We're initiating complete network transmission in 60 seconds. Prepare your sites for full data upload. As Jonas began the transmission sequence, alarms began sounding throughout the laboratory. The perimeter monitoring systems showed that Greystone's teams had begun their assault on the facility's outer defenses. They've detected our activation, Ollie observed, watching the tactical displays. They're moving fast now. Then we'd better move faster, Jonas said, his fingers flying over the master console as he initiated Dr. Thornfield's ultimate protocol, the complete revelation of research that had been protected for more than a century. Outside the laboratory, explosions echoed through the mountain as Greystone's teams tried to blast their way through the facility's concealed entrances. But inside, Jonas and Ollie worked calmly at the master console, ensuring that Dr. Elias Thornfield's legacy would survive regardless of what happened to its guardians. The transmission began, sending decades of botanical research, medical discoveries, and environmental solutions to research institutions around the world. Whatever else happened, Dr. Thornfield's knowledge would finally reach the people who needed it most. 6 months after the revelation of Dr. Thornfield's research network, Jonas and Ollie stood in a newly constructed research facility built near the site of their original cabin. The federal government had designated the entire area as a protected research preserve, ensuring that the botanical ecosystems Dr. Thornfield had studied would be maintained for future generations. The transmission from the laboratory had been successful beyond their wildest hopes. Research institutions in 12 countries were already conducting clinical trials based on Dr. Thornfield's medicinal plant discoveries, while environmental scientists were applying his ecosystem restoration techniques to damaged landscapes around the world. Marcus Greystone and his corporate backers had been arrested on charges of industrial espionage, trespassing, and conspiracy to steal protected research. The legal case had revealed a network of corporations and foreign interests that had been systematically trying to locate and exploit hidden scientific discoveries for decades. The publicity surrounding the case had led to new international laws protecting indigenous knowledge and historical research from commercial exploitation. Dr. Chen, the morning briefing is ready, Ollie called out, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had found his place in the world. At 13, Ollie had become the youngest research coordinator in the history of the Thornfield Hale Foundation, the organization established to manage Dr. Thornfield's legacy. His natural aptitude for botanical systems and his deep understanding of the research network made him an invaluable bridge between the historical materials and modern scientific applications. Jonas looked up from the administrative reports he'd been reviewing. As Director of Guardian Operations, he oversaw the integration of the 17 Guardian families into a legitimate research organization that maintained Dr. Thornfield's principles while operating in the modern world. The morning briefing brought updates from around the globe. A team in Kenya was using Dr. Thornfield's soil restoration techniques to reclaim agricultural land damaged by drought. Researchers in Brazil were applying his medicinal plant protocols to develop treatments for tropical diseases. Scientists in Norway were studying his ecosystem mapping methods to understand climate change impacts on Arctic vegetation. The most interesting development is from Dr. Sarah Thornfield Chen's team in Denver, Dr. Margaret Chen reported during the briefing. They've successfully synthesized 3 of Elias's medicinal compounds, but the synthetic versions are only about 60% as effective as the natural preparations, which confirms what he suspected, Jonas said. The healing properties come from the complete ecosystem interactions, not just individual chemical compounds. It was a principle that had guided all their work over the past 6 months. Rather than trying to commercialize Dr. Thornfield's discoveries, the Foundation focused on understanding and preserving the natural systems that made his treatments possible. "Dad," Ollie said as the briefing concluded, "Mrs. Patterson's class from Helena is here for their field trip." Jonas smiled. Educational outreach had become one of their most important activities. The research preserve attracted thousands of visitors each year, from elementary school students to graduate researchers, all eager to learn about Dr. Thornfield's approach to botanical medicine. They walked to the visitor center, where Jonas found himself facing 30 excited 4th graders who were about to experience the same sense of wonder that had changed his and Ollie's lives. "Who can tell me what makes a plant medicinal?" Jonas asked the group. Hands shot up throughout the classroom. The children's enthusiasm reminded Jonas of Ollie's excitement when he'd first discovered Dr. Thornfield's journal, and he felt the same sense of possibility that had carried them through their most difficult moments. As Jonas led the students through the preserve's demonstration gardens, he reflected on how completely their lives had changed. The desperate single father who had fled to the mountains with his grieving son was gone, replaced by someone who had found purpose in protecting and sharing knowledge that could heal the world. "Mr. Hale," one of the students asked, "were you scared when you found the treasure?" Jonas considered the question carefully. "I was scared of making the wrong choice," he said finally. "When you find something that could help a lot of people, you have to decide whether to keep it safe by hiding it or help people by sharing it. What made you decide to share it?" Jonas looked across the demonstration gardens to where Ollie was, working with a group of visiting researchers, explaining the relationships between soil conditions and plant chemistry with the expertise of someone who had inherited both knowledge and responsibility. "I realized that the best way to honor the people who came before us was to make sure their work could continue helping people long into the future," Jonas said. "Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust others to use something precious responsibly." That evening, after the visitors had departed and the research teams had concluded their daily work, Jonas and Ollie walked to the site where their original cabin had stood. The building had been preserved as a historical monument, with plaques explaining the role it had played in protecting Dr. Thornfield's research for more than a century. "Do you miss the quiet?" Jonas asked his son. Ollie considered the question as they sat on the cabin's front steps, looking out over the valley that now bustled with research activity and educational programs. "I miss the simplicity sometimes," he said, "but I think Mum would be proud of what we're doing here." Jonas touched the spot on his finger where Sarah's ring had once been. The ring itself was now part of a memorial display in the visitor center, but the love and support it had represented remained with them in everything they did. "She always said you were meant for something special," Jonas told his son. "I think she would have been amazed to see how right she was." As the sun set behind the western peaks, father and son sat together in comfortable silence, surrounded by the legacy they had inherited and the future they were helping to create. The desperate flight that had brought them to these mountains had become a journey toward purpose, responsibility, and the understanding that sometimes losing everything you thought you wanted was the first step toward finding what you were meant to protect. The mountain wilderness stretched around them, holding the secrets of Dr. Elias Thornfield's remarkable discoveries and the continuing story of the guardians who ensured that knowledge dedicated to healing would always find its way to those who needed it most. In laboratories around the world, researchers were building on foundations laid more than a century ago, creating treatments and solutions that would benefit generations yet to come. Jonas and Ollie had learned that true treasure wasn't gold or valuable artifacts. It was the opportunity to be part of something larger than themselves, something that could make the world a better place for all the people who would come after them. They had become guardians, not just of Dr. Thornfield's research, but of the principle that knowledge, when properly protected and shared, could heal not just individual suffering, but the wounded places in the world itself.